Late at night, far out in the Caribbean, there is a small island surrounded by dark water and long stretches of silence. Palm trees move slowly in the wind. Private boats approach the docks. Aircraft once landed on distant runways far from public attention. The island is known as Little St. James, a property that for years was owned by Jeffrey Epstein and later appeared repeatedly in court documents and public investigations. According to publicly available records and court filings, the island became one of several locations connected to Epstein's activities. But understanding what truly happened there is far more complicated than headlines suggest. Because the real story does not begin with rumors or internet speculation. It begins inside legal documents, depositions, sworn testimony, and filings submitted in court over many years. And when investigators began reviewing these records carefully, one location kept appearing again and again: the island. But this is where things start to become unsettling, because the island itself remained almost completely hidden from the public for years. It was private property. Access was restricted. Very few journalists ever saw it up close. And yet, according to certain testimonies referenced in civil cases connected to Epstein's legal proceedings, several individuals later described visiting the island as part of broader allegations examined in court. Mentioned in documents does not imply wrongdoing by anyone referenced in those records. This distinction is important and must always be stated clearly. However, the repeated appearance of the island across multiple testimonies raised questions that investigators could not ignore. And this is where the documents start to get interesting, because when journalists and legal analysts began comparing different court filings, they noticed something unusual. The same locations appeared repeatedly. The same travel routes appeared repeatedly, and the island appeared at key moments in several separate testimonies that were recorded years apart. But the deeper question was never simply who visited the island. The real question was why this location appeared so frequently in the legal record. Because according to publicly reported records, Epstein owned a private jet used to travel between several properties: New York, Florida, New Mexico, Paris, and the island in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Some of these flights were documented in pilot logs that later became widely discussed after they surfaced in legal proceedings and investigative reporting. These logs appeared to record the movement of various passengers over time: employees, associates, guests, and others connected to Epstein's social circle. Again, the presence of a name in a travel log does not imply wrongdoing, but investigators began comparing those records with dates mentioned in sworn testimony. And this is where the pattern begins to shift, because when travel records were placed beside depositions and legal statements, certain overlaps started to appear. Not proof, not conclusions, but correlations that encouraged investigators to look closer. Do you want to know the truth behind the Epstein case? The darkest, most shocking secrets that the powerful don't want you to know? Then you need to follow this channel right now. Click the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, because what we're about to reveal will shake the very foundations of power, and you can't miss a single detail. Prepare yourself for a journey into the depths of depravity and corruption. And join us in this fight for justice. Subscribe now. Sometimes a name would appear in a flight record. Months later, a witness would reference the island during testimony. Years later, the same location would appear again in a separate legal filing. And slowly, a picture began to form. Not a complete picture, but fragments scattered across years of litigation. Because most of what the public knows about the island did not come from dramatic press conferences or public trials, it emerged quietly through civil lawsuits, depositions, and settlement discussions. Legal processes that often happen far from public attention. And this is where the timeline becomes important. In 2008, Epstein entered into a controversial plea agreement in Florida related to charges involving the solicitation of minors for prostitution, according to official court records. The agreement has since been widely debated because it resolved the case with a sentence many observers later described as unusually lenient. But that agreement also had another consequence. It slowed the momentum of broader investigations that might have examined a larger network of activities connected to Epstein's properties. For years after that deal, many questions remained unanswered. The island rarely appeared in headlines, and the deeper structure surrounding Epstein's operations remained largely hidden from public view until new lawsuits began to appear. And those lawsuits brought new testimony. And those testimonies brought the island back into focus. But here's where things become even more complicated, because according to certain court filings from later civil cases, individuals who later testified under oath described traveling to the island during periods connected to Epstein's social gatherings. Some testimonies referenced buildings on the property. Others described staff movements. Some mentioned boats arriving late in the evening. But again, references inside documents do not establish guilt or wrongdoing for anyone mentioned in those records unless proven in court. Still, the island itself began attracting attention from investigators who wanted to understand what exactly existed there. Satellite images began circulating in reports. Aerial photographs revealed multiple buildings spread across the island. Property records confirmed that the estate had expanded over time through significant construction. At the center of the property stood a large residence overlooking the water. Nearby were guest villas, staff housing, private docks, and other structures that appeared to support long-term stays. One building in particular caught public attention because of its unusual design, a blue and white structure with a domed roof that appeared clearly in aerial photographs. Its exact purpose has never been fully confirmed in publicly available court documents. And this is where curiosity begins to grow. Well, because according to property records referenced in investigative reporting, Epstein invested large sums of money developing the island over time. Infrastructure expanded, additional buildings appeared, security systems were reportedly installed. Yet despite all of this activity, very little information about daily life on the island entered the public record for many years, until investigators began examining visitor patterns. And what they discovered raised new questions. Because according to flight records and testimony referenced in legal proceedings, The island was visited by a wide range of individuals over time: employees, associates, business contacts, and people who later became witnesses in civil lawsuits connected to Epstein's legal cases. But the disturbing part is not what most people expect, because the majority of these details did not appear suddenly in a single dramatic revelation. They emerged gradually, piece by piece, document by document. A deposition here, a sealed filing there, a partially redacted page released years later. And that is what makes the island such a persistent mystery. Because when you step back and examine the public record as a whole, the island begins to look less like a simple vacation property and more like one location inside a much larger network. Flights connecting multiple cities, companies controlling various properties, legal agreements negotiated across jurisdictions, testimony recorded across many years. But the deeper issue may not be the island itself. The deeper issue may be structure. Because according to publicly reported records, Epstein controlled numerous corporate entities and trusts over time, some connected to property ownership, others connected to financial management or aircraft registration. And when investigators began mapping those structures, they noticed how often they overlapped with the locations mentioned in testimony, including the island. But another factor complicates the story even further: jurisdiction. The island is located in the U.S. Virgin Islands, a U.S. territory with its own legal framework, its own authorities, and its own regulatory environment. And jurisdiction matters because it determines which investigators have authority, which laws apply, and how evidence is gathered in complex cases. When multiple jurisdictions are involved, investigations can become extremely difficult to coordinate, which raises another question that legal experts still debate. If activities were occurring across several properties in different regions under different legal systems, who was responsible for investigating the entire picture? Local police, federal investigators, civil courts, financial regulators, each had a piece of the puzzle, but rarely the full puzzle. And this is where the story becomes even more unsettling. Because when you examine the public record carefully, the island appears again and again at critical moments in testimony, not as the only location connected to Epstein's cases, but as one that seems to sit at the center of many conversations. Yet the full story of what happened there has never been presented in one complete narrative inside the legal record. Instead, it exists in fragments, scattered across depositions, hidden behind redactions, referenced in testimony that sometimes reveals only part of the story. And that raises a question investigators continue to ask today. What exactly remains inside the sealed documents that the public has never fully seen? Because over the years, thousands of pages connected to Epstein's investigations have been filed in courts. Some released, others partially redacted, and some still sealed under judicial review. And when new documents occasionally surface years later, they sometimes reveal details that change how the entire timeline is understood. Which brings us to the moment that forced investigators to look at the island again. When a series of previously sealed records began to emerge, revealing new testimony, new references to locations, and new questions about what witnesses actually said happened there. And when those statements are placed side by side, the picture begins to change in ways very few people expected. Because the most revealing details about the island were not discovered by journalists visiting the property. They were revealed quietly inside sworn testimony given under oath. As investigators continued examining the documents, the focus slowly shifted from the island itself to the testimonies connected to it. Because, according to court filings and publicly released depositions, several witnesses who later participated in civil proceedings described being taken to the island as part of a broader pattern of travel connected to Jeffrey Epstein's properties. And these statements appeared across different lawsuits and were recorded years apart. Yet certain descriptions began to resemble each other in ways that investigators found difficult to ignore. According to sworn testimony referenced in court documents, some witnesses described arriving on the island by private aircraft or boat. The property itself, they said, contained several buildings, including a large main residence, guest villas, and staff areas. Employees were reportedly present on the island during these visits. Security staff and household workers were also mentioned in certain depositions. Some individuals who later testified under oath alleged that gatherings sometimes occurred on the island. According to these statements, guests and associates would occasionally travel there from Epstein's other properties. These accounts appeared in civil cases connected to broader allegations that were later investigated by authorities. It is important to state clearly that being mentioned in documents or travel records does not imply wrongdoing by any individual unless such wrongdoing has been formally established in court. Many names appeared in flight logs or testimony without accusations attached to them. But investigators reviewing the public record noticed something else. The island was not the only location mentioned. Witnesses frequently described movement between several Epstein properties: New York, Florida, New Mexico, and the Caribbean island itself. According to legal filings, this network of locations appeared repeatedly in testimony. Some witnesses stated in court documents that the island felt isolated, surrounded by water, difficult to access without private transportation, a place where very few outsiders would normally arrive without invitation. This isolation later became one reason investigators considered the island important when reviewing the overall structure of Epstein's activities. According to allegations referenced in civil lawsuits, certain individuals described being brought to the island during periods connected to Epstein's social gatherings. Some testimonies referenced interactions with Epstein and other people present on the property. These statements formed part of the evidence examined during legal proceedings. But much of what happened on the island remains partially hidden because many documents connected to these cases were heavily redacted when released to the public. Names were removed, details were blacked out, and entire passages were sometimes sealed by the court. Despite these limitations, the public record does show that the island was mentioned repeatedly in testimony connected to Epstein's legal cases. Witnesses described travel there, staff working there, and events occurring during certain visits. These statements became part of the broader body of evidence examined in civil litigation and investigative reporting. After Epstein's arrest in 2019 on federal charges related to sex trafficking of minors, federal investigators began examining several of his properties as part of the investigation. According to publicly reported information, this included the island. Authorities reviewed records, interviewed witnesses, and examined financial and travel documentation connected to the case. However, the investigation was dramatically affected by Epstein's death in custody later that year while awaiting trial. His death meant the criminal case against him would not proceed to a full courtroom trial, leaving many questions unresolved in the public record. Since then, civil cases, document releases, and investigative journalism have continued to reveal fragments of information about Epstein's network and the locations connected to it, including the island. But because much of the evidence exists within depositions, sealed filings, and settlement records, the complete picture remains difficult to reconstruct from public documents alone. What is clear from the available records is that the island appeared repeatedly in testimony connected to Epstein's cases. Witnesses described traveling there, investigators reviewed the property, and legal proceedings referenced the location many times over the years. But the most difficult question still remains unanswered. Are you shocked by what we've uncovered so far? Well, that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to come. More powerful names, more sinister schemes, more silenced victims. If you want to be on the front lines of this investigation, you need to subscribe to this channel now. Leave your comment below and tell us what you think. Your voice is crucial in this fight. The more we unite, the stronger our call for accountability will be. So subscribe, comment, and share. The truth depends on it. If so many testimonies reference the island, and if so many documents mention activities connected to it, what exactly remains inside the sealed records that the public has never fully seen? As more records slowly entered the public domain, investigators and journalists began comparing hundreds of pages of depositions, financial filings, travel logs, and testimony. And what started to emerge was not a single shocking moment, but a pattern that stretched across years. According to publicly reported court documents, the island appeared repeatedly in civil litigation connected to Jeffrey Epstein. Witnesses described travel there, staff working there, and gatherings that allegedly occurred during certain visits. Again, these references appear in legal filings and sworn statements, and mentioning individuals in documents does not imply wrongdoing unless it has been formally established in court. But what made the island stand out was not just the testimony itself. It was the consistency of the descriptions. Several witnesses in different proceedings described arriving by private aircraft in the U.S. Virgin Islands. From there, transportation by boat or helicopter would bring visitors to Little St. James. According to public records and reporting, the property was designed to operate almost like a self-contained estate, housing for staff, guest residences, private docks and infrastructure that allowed extended stays without frequent travel back to the mainland. Investigators reviewing the broader timeline began noticing how the island fit into a much larger network of locations. Epstein owned or controlled properties in New York, Palm Beach, New Mexico, and Paris. According to court filings, eyewitnesses sometimes described traveling between these places over time. The island appeared as one point within that network. But this is where the pattern becomes more complicated, because the legal record does not present one clear narrative of events on the island. Instead, it presents fragments, testimony from different individuals recorded years apart, sometimes describing similar circumstances. Yet many of those records remain partially redacted. Well, meaning important context may still be missing from the publicly available documents, and this has created an unusual situation. On one hand, thousands of pages of legal material exist: depositions, motions, exhibits, and settlement records connected to civil cases. On the other hand, only portions of those documents have been fully released to the public, which means the story of the island exists in pieces. Some pieces come from flight logs that record movements between Epstein's properties. Some come from sworn testimony given during lawsuits. Some come from financial records tied to property ownership and corporate structures that controlled various assets. When those pieces are placed side by side, investigators begin to see how the island functioned inside a broader system, not necessarily as the only location connected to Epstein's activities, but as one of several places mentioned repeatedly in the legal record. And then something else happened that changed how the public looked at the entire case. Beginning in the years after Epstein's death in 2019, courts began reviewing requests to unseal previously confidential filings connected to earlier lawsuits. Journalists and researchers started analyzing those newly available documents carefully. Some of these files included additional testimony. Others included references to individuals who had previously been anonymized in legal records. Again, appearing in a document does not imply wrongdoing by anyone mentioned unless proven in court. But every time a new set of records became public, the same location continued appearing inside the timeline: the island. And this raised an institutional question that legal analysts often discuss when reviewing complex investigations. When activities, travel, financial arrangements, and witness testimony all stretch across multiple jurisdictions, multiple years, and multiple legal cases, how does any single investigation fully reconstruct the entire picture? Because each lawsuit focuses on a specific claim. Each criminal case focuses on a specific charge, and each regulatory inquiry examines only a narrow portion of the overall structure, which means the broader network often becomes visible only when documents from different proceedings are examined together. And that is exactly what researchers have been attempting to do with the Epstein files. Not to build speculation, but to understand the structure revealed in the public record, the properties, the travel patterns, the corporate entities, the legal agreements, and the testimonies that connect them. The island sits at the center of many of those documents. Yet, despite years of reporting and legal review, The complete story of what happened there remains partially hidden behind sealed records, redactions, and unanswered questions, which leaves investigators, journalists, and the public facing the same question that has followed this case for years. If the documents already released reveal this much about the network surrounding Epstein and the island he owned, what might still be contained in the records that have not yet been fully disclosed? When the final layers of the public record are examined, the story of the island becomes less about a single place and more about how large investigations unfold when power, money, and multiple legal systems intersect. Because according to publicly available documents, Little St. James was only one element within a broader structure connected to Jeffrey Epstein's operations. Property records confirm that the island was purchased in the late 1990s and later expanded through significant construction. Additional buildings were added over time, including guest houses, staff residences, and private docks. Aerial images and satellite photographs later revealed how extensive the development had become. The property was designed to operate almost like a private compound. According to testimony referenced in civil litigation, visitors sometimes arrived by private aircraft in the U.S. Virgin Islands and were transported to the island by boat. These descriptions appear in depositions connected to lawsuits filed by individuals who later brought allegations related to Epstein's activities. Again, allegations referenced in filings do not establish guilt unless proven in court. What investigators found significant was how often the island appeared across different legal proceedings, not as the sole location connected to Epstein, but as a recurring point within a larger network of properties. New York, Palm Beach, New Mexico, Paris, and the Caribbean island itself. Witnesses in various cases described travel between these locations. After Epstein's arrest in July 2019 on federal charges related to alleged sex trafficking of minors, law enforcement agencies began examining several of his properties as part of the investigation. According to publicly reported information, this included properties connected to the U.S. Virgin Islands. Investigators reviewed financial records, travel logs, and witness statements connected to the case. But the course of that investigation changed dramatically only weeks later. In August 2019, Epstein died in federal custody while awaiting trial. His death meant the criminal case against him would not proceed through a full trial where evidence could have been presented publicly in court. Without a trial, many details that might have emerged through courtroom testimony were never fully examined in that setting. Instead, much of what the public understands today comes from civil litigation, investigative journalism, and document releases ordered by courts in later years. Since then, thousands of pages of records connected to Epstein's legal history have been reviewed and partially released. Depositions, exhibits, financial documents, and testimony recorded under oath. Some of these documents reference the island. Others reference individuals connected to Epstein's social and business networks. Appearing in these documents does not imply wrongdoing unless confirmed through legal findings. Yet even with these records available, a complete narrative remains difficult to construct. Many files remain partially redacted. Some records are still sealed, and some testimony exists only in fragments scattered across multiple legal proceedings. This is why the island continues to attract attention from journalists and researchers. Not because it provides simple answers, but because it appears repeatedly across the documentary trail left behind by the Epstein investigations. The buildings still exist. The docks remain visible in satellite imagery. The location itself has since changed ownership, but the questions tied to its history remain part of the broader public record surrounding Epstein's case. And perhaps the most revealing aspect of the entire story is not what the island represents on its own, but what it reveals about how complex systems of influence, jurisdiction, and legal procedure can shape what the public ultimately sees. Investigations can produce thousands of pages of records. Court filings can stretch across decades. Witness testimony can appear in different cases years apart. Yet the full picture often remains incomplete unless every document, every deposition, and every legal proceeding is examined together. In the case of Jeffrey Epstein and the island he once owned, the public record provides fragments of that picture, enough to show patterns, timelines, and structures, but not always enough to fully resolve every question. Which leaves one final issue at the center of the discussion. If transparency depends on the release of documents, and if many documents connected to this case remain sealed or partially redacted, how much of the full historical record surrounding Epstein's network is still waiting inside files the public has never seen? You've made it this far. You've seen how deep the rabbit hole goes, how vast the webs of complicity are. Well, now you have a choice. You can turn your back and pretend none of this happened. Or you can join us. Subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, leave your comment, and most importantly, share this video. Because the only way to defeat the darkness is to bring it into the light. The more people see, the harder it will be for the predators to hide. Together, we can build an unstoppable movement for justice. But it starts with you, with your voice, your dedication. Click on that subscribe button. Let's make this echo in the halls of power. Let's shake the foundations of the mighty. Let's show the entire world what truth can do. But only if you join us now. Subscribe, act, and let's change history together.